All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Charles Robinson. I'm one of the owners here at Eagle Eye. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I know this is a very hectic time of the year, so we really appreciate you taking a little time out of your schedule to come to one of our book events. And this is one of the few in-person ones that we've done this year, but we're glad that we've gotten to do any at all. And we hope that, next year we're going to keep going with this, do even more. If you're interested in things like this, we have some information at the front counter we can give you to get on our email list. We don't spam you, don't worry. All your information is safe. And we really appreciate you coming out. Yeah, we got a nice little crowd going here. So we're all here to talk about John and Carol's new book that we literally just got our copies in today of. And also thank you all for bearing with us and rescheduling the date of this event according to how the publisher could get us the actual merchandise here. And yeah, I didn't know until yesterday evening when John came in. I said, "Oh yeah, is your illustrator going to be with you?" And he said, "Yeah, that's my wife, so she'll be here." I said, "Oh, convenient, okay." And some really good things said about this book. I haven't gotten a chance to check it out yet myself, but the previous book, which we also have available, Raven Wakes the World, both very good winter tales. We've got the weather working with us on that now, so just pick up a copy. We've got like an insane number now, which is awesome. And I looked at John's website to get a little background on him, and it seems like he's done quite a few jobs over the years. And there was something mentioned about him being a lord of some country. Knights, yes. And so that was definitely of note. And then I looked up some stuff on Carol, couldn't find too much, but I didn't, go to the dark web or anything yet. And one thing that I did find interesting, which I'm sure comes into play with her work that she does here, she had her undergraduate in fine arts and then got her graduate in computer science. So that is very impressive. And so we are going to talk about the new book. We're just going to do whatever they want, as long as it doesn't involve torching the place or anything, and we all get out of here at a decent hour. But thank y'all for coming, and let's just have a good time here.
Thanks.
Thank y'all.
Thanks so much for coming. We had exactly the right number of chairs. As you guys probably know, we had our first book come out last year during COVID. So this is actually our first in a bookstore book launch ever. And it's a dream come true for me. It's a lifelong ambition. And we're beyond thrilled. So by the way, Eric and Bill that are here actually read the very first version of this when it was in its infancy. Carol and I started this as a collaborative project. Long before we were even dating, when we were just friends. We had the idea that it would be fun to do a Christmas story every year to give our friends. So I wrote the story, and Carol did the illustrations, and then we bound them and gave them out. So, flash forward 16 years later, I pitched to Lou Aronica at the Story Plant, our publisher, doing a collection of the 4 short stories together. And Lou read the stories and thought, no, these are novels. You need to expand them. Those of you who've read some already know I tend to go a little bit on the long side. I'm being told to expand something was quite a happy surprise and a joy. So these are more than twice as long as the originals, and I think they're very different. But I also think they're a lot more mature than they were at the time. And Carol has certainly had time to reinvent and expand the illustrations a bit. You want to talk about the illustrations?
I would like to talk about them after you talk about the book.
Okay. Sure. Well, this is a winter tale. It's a ghost story. And when I had the idea with this, I was at the James Joyce Irish Pub, that's no longer there, in Avondale with Bill. And I'd been working on a completely different story. And I had this idea, and it didn't leave my head. I just sort of fell in love with it. And I started writing it that very night. And that weekend, Carol and I were going to Tennessee to visit her parents. And I wrote more than half of it that weekend while we were away from home. Mm-hmm. And I think it's my favorite of all the ones we did. One thing that happened when we expanded them is they changed a bit. In the original version of the story, Jesse, the main character, is a folklorist who is trying to trace an urban legend, you know, one of those, oh, I swear it's true, I heard it from a friend of a friend, back to its original source, back to the original author of the urban legend. And in the story, that's really all she was. She was a folklorist, and the driving element of the story for her was solving this mystery and getting to the bottom of it. But this time around, Jessie got a backstory, and that she is a grieving widow. She's recently lost her husband, and she's lost in grief and has an encounter with something that might be called miraculous. Without spoilers, it sends her to a place of peace and healing. Now, the last year's story, Raven Wakes the World, was also about a woman lost in grief who has an encounter with something supernatural that leads her to a place of comfort and healing. I really had not noticed that, but you'll be glad to know that next year's stories is a change of pace in that it's a man who is lost in grief. Has an encounter with something that might be called a miracle, and it leads you to a place of yeah. Anyway, that one's sort of a Christmassy national treasure, Indiana Jones action adventure, ancient mystery type story. And the one after that is a rom-com, which has no grief at all, except that there's a lot of puns. So if there's grief, it's not one of the characters in the stories.
From the dad jokes.
Yeah. Which actually, you know, teasing a story, it's not coming out for 2 years, was an idea I got the first time I went to Carol's bathroom when we were dating.
Okay.
And yeah, as a guy, that's not really a place where we normally go. And all her makeup was out. And I was reading the labels because, you know, it's a mystery to me. And as I'm reading the labels, I thought this should be much cooler than it actually is. There was like vanishing cream, concealer. My favorite, and I swear this is real. I'm talking to the guys now. It was called anti-gravity lift cream.
How disappointing.
It did not. But I kept thinking, so that story has a woman who gets a Christmas wish and doesn't believe it. So she sort of dismisses it and says, I wish all this makeup did what it really said it would do.
Oh.
So like clarifying lotion, she spills on a bewildering spreadsheet and suddenly she can understand it. Vanishing cream makes things disappear. You get the idea. And yes, I use the anti-gravity lift cream. But I guess we should talk about the book that's coming out 2 years before then, Christmas Past. It was originally called I'll Be Home for Christmas, from the song. And we had to change the title because there's a lot of books called I'll Be Home for Christmas. There's also another book called Christmas Past, but it's called A Cowboy's Christmas Past.
There's a lot of books
Yeah.
called Christmas Past.
Yeah, but they don't have TV commercials, and we have TV commercials this time, which I'm enormously proud of. By the way, one thing we did differently for next year's book was normally I wrote the story and then Carol would do illustrations. For the one that became next year's book, Carol did the illustrations first, and then I had to come up with a story to match them.
So just to embellish on that,
Mhm.
I went to Europe.
Yeah.
That was the one I went to Europe,
Mhm.
and I came back and I just made this list of things that I thought, just like random objects from traveling. And I just gave him this like list of 12 things. Just pick from those. And so he picked a subset of those and he constructed a story for it. So
I
we
tried to
tried
get
to
them
get a
all.
little playful about the narrative
Yeah.
there.
So of all of these, that's the one that probably has changed the most, going from story to novel. I assume, because I technically haven't written it yet. But I have a month, so
No problem, right on.
A month?
I've started it.
Goodness.
And I know how it ends, so
Let's go. Just have to get the middle.
it'll get done. So
Should I say?
sure.
Okay, so just a little about the illustrations this time. So for this time, we had the sort of, let's call it the prototype several years ago, and I had some illustrations from that, but John had rewritten it and changed it a lot. So I read it again a couple of times and tried to pull out some of the basic themes. So it's actually a little bit hard to talk about some of it because I don't want to give spoilers, but there, some of the things were like separation and renewal and fracturing and kind of rebinding. And so I like for the illustrations to kind of, they're not just telling a moment, but there's some continuity between them. So between the illustrations and the drop caps, there's a little bit of a story going on within them. So I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you look a little bit deeper into stringing those things together. And one of the characters, so I was trying to figure out, the first time around I had done more of a photo montage than drawn illustration. One of the characters comes from a time frame that kind of lent itself to photojournalism, let's say, without giving any more away. So talking about Jessie and the fact that she was a folklorist and now she's a cultural anthropologist, but what she's actually trying to do is she's trying to find facts. Ironically, she deals with story, but in the pursuit of this story, she's trying to track down facts and she's trying to get a grasp on sort of solid, tangible things. And I thought that kind of lent itself to photo montages. So these are all photo montages, and there's some different.
But you drew some in it too. The figure on the cover, for example.
Yeah, there's some drawing.
Sorry.
There's some drawing in there. And I was trying to give the sense of a little bit of the contrast between the factual and the photorealistic. And there's some elements of there are maps and photographs and newspapers. These are all sort of tangible, concrete things. She is trying to string together this sort of picture of reality, but then there's these other elements that are sort of maybe layers of time, and there's things are obscured and things are a little bit mysterious. And so that was a little bit of the thinking behind some of the illustrations. And then I try to spend a little bit of time with the drop caps to make them a little bit more fun. And then just like and then I try to seed it with some different things. Like for instance, the what do you call it? The
Scene break.
divider,
Scene break.
the scene break thingy. So just to be a little bit thematic. So it actually, in Morse code, it actually spells out Emily and Sam, who are two of the characters. So I just try to populate.
I'm sure y'all would have caught that.
I know you totally would have gotten that and pulled it out there. But just try to, you know, seed it with some different elements of the story so that it hopefully it lasts a couple of readings. And then for the cover, it was the same thing. It's just trying to give the sense of layering and time. And you know, Raven was a much more graphical cover, but this one was a lot more painterly, and we're pretty happy with the way the cover turned out with and hope that you find some depth in it, both in the story and the pictures.
Carol did, the publisher just, we do a spot varnish like on the text and stuff. And Carol did this sort of painterly approach that neither the publisher nor I had ever seen before, nor had the printer, but it really came out just beautifully. And I'm really thrilled.
That's good reason.
Yeah, see, this was the advanced reading copy that we have that went out to the media and bookstores and stuff. And I fell in love with it. But then I saw this, and this is dead to me now. Nonetheless, it's the one I'll be reading from.
We like the size too, and we hope it fits into your stockings.
Yeah, all your Christmas shopping done tonight. So I have to say that collaborating on this with Carol has been just an absolute joy. You know the old saying, the family that creates together finds all kinds of new and amazing things to argue about. But nonetheless, it is an absolute treat and a joy. So,
Right on.
thanks. So I'm going to read the first chapter, and the chapters are pretty short in this, and they all have names that sort of echo how urban legends sound. So I'm going to read the first chapter, and if there's time, I'll read one more scene that's one of the flashback scenes that gives a little bit of Jesse's history. So this is chapter 1, The Vanishing Workday. By the way, I wish that I could have the woman who reads the audiobook version read this, because she is absolutely amazing. And this is told in first person from a woman's point of view. So you have to imagine my voice being a little bit higher. But she does an amazing job. I was going to do it in falsetto, but Carol said no. The Vanishing Workday, chapter 1. I was in London when I first heard about Sam's ghost. God knows I didn't have time to be following a ghost tale, no matter how intriguing it might sound. My tiny flat was filled to the rafters with books and notebooks full of research I'd gathered but not organized. They needed my attention desperately. The looming piles of research I hadn't yet begun to plow through were even more daunting. A forest of Post-it notes covered every flat surface. But I couldn't stop thinking about Sam. Focus, Jessie girl, I commanded myself with my sternest inner voice. Focus. It didn't help. On the surface, Sam's ghost seemed to be a variant of the vanishing hitchhiker motif. You've heard it. Maybe somebody told it to you at an office party, or a pub, or around a campfire. Campfires are the best for stories. Anyway, a friend of a friend swears it's true. That's how urban legends work, you know. Someone picks up a hitcher on a dark and stormy night, only to have the passenger disappear before they reach the destination. When the driver asks around, he finds that the hitcher's description matches that of a daughter or a bride or a girlfriend who died years before. It's almost always a woman, except for Sam. More, the details of Sam's story didn't seem to vary from report to report the way they should, not even subtly. Only the dates and location changed. Well, the point where the story began changed. The ending did not. It's like the poke process hadn't touched it at all, and the tale was apparently at least 60 years old. That just shouldn't be. No, more than that. It couldn't be. No, no, no. I was approaching the lip of a rabbit hole again. I didn't have time. I was scheduled to go to Paris for research in just a few days. It was all arranged. If I came back with new data from the French libraries before I had managed to sort what I'd already done, I'd have no hope. My dissertation would be lost forever, buried under an avalanche of unannotated paper and Post-it notes. I didn't have time to eat, sleep, or even breathe, much less get distracted by something new, something that didn't have anything at all to do with my topic. No matter that, unlike most urban legends, this one seemed to be a serial story, one that apparently continued year to year, rather than simply being passed along by a friend of a friend, acquiring slight variations each time it's retold. No matter that the latest episode actually seemed fresh, and perhaps even local to London, fresh enough that I might actually be able to track down a genuine original source, at least for the latest variation anyway. No, I didn't have time. No matter that I might become one of the very few cultural anthropologists to actually track an urban legend to its source. Besides, I wasn't even a cultural anthropologist yet, and I never would be if I didn't get a handle on the stupid dissertation. I wanted to be Dr. Jesse Malone. That meant I had to focus. I put a kettle for tea on the stove and, with effort, banished Sam's ghost from my thoughts. I had to finish my dissertation. I promised David, after all. I promised him. A promise to my David is sacred. My dissertation was supposed to be on variations of the Pleading Ghost story. You've probably heard that one too. It goes rather like this. A poor priest in London, it's usually London in the oldest variations, convenient, since that's where I happen to be researching it, is reading alone in his home one evening when he hears a knock at his door. Pulling on a robe over his dressing gown, he opens the door to find an old woman wearing a rather outdated clothing, including a bonnet and shawl. It's almost always a bonnet and a shawl, even though they're not always black. But I'm being a scholar instead of a storyteller. Anyway, the frantic woman begs the priest to come with her, saying he is needed desperately. The priest resists, citing the cold, the snow, and the late hour. Perhaps he can come around tomorrow instead. The woman persists, and eventually the priest agrees. She gives him an address in Regent's Park, and he goes to dress and get a coat. The priest suffers a cold and miserable walk through the dark streets of the fog-bound city. Later, he arrives at one of London's ritziest manors to find an elegant party in full swing. All of London's elite is present. Our priest knocks on the door, and a butler answers. "Hello," says the shivering priest. He then gives his name. Sometimes it's Mulligan, sometimes Gray, sometimes Johnson, or a dozen other variant Irish, Scottish, Welsh, or English names. "I believe I'm wanted here," he says. "Do you have an invitation, Father?" the butler asks curtly. "No," says the priest, rather flustered, "but I was told I'm needed." The butler escorts him into a small sitting room and presently returns with the master of the house, a very well-known and respected gentleman, usually a lord or a banker or something like that. The priest tells the gentleman what happened. The gentleman claims that no one sent for a priest, but asks our friend to describe his visitor. The priest does so, and a strange look crosses the gentleman's face. And then, suddenly, the man starts weeping uncontrollably. As our friend the priest holds the sobbing man, he confesses a life of terrible crime and wickedness. The details always vary, but believe me, they're never pleasant. The priest urges the man to confess and make his peace with God. The man does so, and the priest, convinced of the sincerity of his conversion, grants him absolution with a gentle smile and a touch to the bowed head. As he leaves, he admonishes the man to come to Mass in the morning. The man promises to do so, and the priest bids him good night. The next day, of course, the man doesn't show. Concerned, the priest goes to visit him again. Once again, the butler answers, telling the priest that the master is dead. That can't be, exclaims the priest. I spoke to him just last night. Alas, insists the butler, the master died in his sleep. Shocked, the priest asks to see the body that he might say a prayer for the man's soul. The butler agrees. When they reach the master's bedroom, the priest notices a portrait hanging on the wall and recognizes the woman who came to fetch him the night before. Who's that woman? He asks. Why, that's the master's mother, father, says the butler. She died several years ago. The tale always ends the same way. It was recorded in Philadelphia as early as 1951. Two different sources there claim to have heard it in London from an acquaintance of the priest himself, a friend of a friend. Of course, both sources gave conflicting details and locations in the city. I found variations of the pleading ghost story all over the world, but for the most part, the trails all seem to lead back to London. I say seem because some of the variants were recorded in Paris at about the same time. Here in London, I'd found sources dating back to the 1800s. Some may be even older, but, well, again, with the post-it notes and piles of research I hadn't plowed through yet. I plan to start the next phase of my research in Paris at the first of the next week. My hope was to pen down a single origin for the tale. I truly wanted to be one of the few to find and identify an actual original source. That might not prove possible, of course, but it wouldn't be for a lack of sources. Seriously, I had piles of material to read through. I'd spent the morning at the British Library going through archived newspapers and magazines, and I'd spent the balance of the day tracking down old journals and diaries. Now, the fruits of my labor waited in tall, intimidating piles, bushels upon bushels of them, demanding my attention. I yawned. The tea kettle whistled, startling me with its appropriately ghostly wail, but I turned it off without bothering to pour myself a cup. I couldn't face the thought of reading, or worse, trying to organize my notes and resources into something more or less manageable. I yawned again, more prodigiously. It would all still be there tomorrow, still waiting for me. For better or for worse, the workday had vanished, leaving me even further behind. I washed off my makeup, brushed my teeth, and went to bed. I didn't let myself think about Sam's ghost as I lay in my cold bed in the darkness. If I wasn't going to work, I needed to sleep. Go away, Sam, I said out loud. Just take your pattern-breaking story and be gone. Leave me alone. I couldn't afford to be distracted by a new tale, no matter how much it intrigued me. I glanced at David's picture on the bedside table before I drifted off to sleep. Good night, my love, I said, just as I said every night before sleep took me. Miss you. I said that to him every night. Good night. I always said it. I always said that because I couldn't bring myself to say goodbye. Not to David. Not ever. That's the end of chapter 1.
Wow.
Then I'll read one more short scene that's a few pages later. This is the flashback. Jesse's remembering her time with David, and this is her engagement. It was my second Christmas in England, my second with David. We'd been in Piccadilly Arcade in the very heart of central London that day. If you don't know it, you should, even though David always called it a touristy nightmare. It's a charming place, a sort of hybrid between an alley and a shopping mall that, at the time, I thought was just quintessentially English and a perfect place to buy gifts for all the family back home in the States. I remember standing by myself, huddled against the cold, with all my bags and bundles arranged carefully at my feet, cradling an almost empty cup of hot chocolate in my mittened hands and waiting more or less patiently for David. Don't believe anyone who tells you that men shop faster than women. How could they? We have more experience. He emerged from a shop at last, carrying a few tiny bags. His long woolen overcoat was unbuttoned and his scarf was undone, so everyone could see my handsome Englishman in the ugly Christmas sweater I'd bought him the year before. The wind mussed his sandy brown hair, which, as always, looked like it was just a week or two past due for a trim, and fogged his glasses. Dishevelment suited him. He looked absolutely delectable, if in a Tweety sort of way. I looked down at all the bags and raised my eyebrows. Gifts for all your girlfriends? David nodded and smiled his crooked smile. Yes, indeed. Every one of them. We started to walk together. I carefully arranged my most persuasive smile, the one I used to practice in the mirror when I was in middle school. Is one of them maybe for me? David rolled his eyes, but he couldn't hide his own smile. Perhaps. Let me see. Manx, it's not Christmas yet, is it? Life is uncertain, I pointed out. Live for the moment. Isn't that what you always say? I most certainly do not. No Englishman ever says that, nor anything of the sort. Well, you totally should. A little spontaneity would be good for you. I'll schedule some in then, soon as I'm back to my diary. How about now? What? And ruin Christmas? Jesse, you love Christmas, all the traditions and whatnot. I can love it just as much right now, I insisted stubbornly. No, you most certainly cannot. You shall wait for Christmas morning. The smile clearly hadn't worked, so I tried puppy dog eyes. Come on, one present, please, one. I added more than one extra syllable in the middle of the please. David laughed. Oh, all right, you. Bingo. Puppy dog eyes never fail. I love you. You'd better, David said. God, I can still hear his voice and that scrumptious accent. I can still smell his scent. Sweet wool and sandalwood aftershave, mingled with his own salty musk. Here. He stopped, shifted his burdens, and offered me one gift bag, the biggest of the bunch. I looked around and there, I spotted a cafe table where I could set my bundles down. I took the bag from David and peeked inside. I grinned. The bag held a rather impressive stack of DVDs. I didn't have to shift them too much to see that they were all Christmas movies. David, I love these. How'd you know? He shrugged in that awkward, adorable way of his. Well, I didn't really, did I? He smiled that crooked smile again. But I do know you love Christmas. And if I didn't, well, it certainly wouldn't be because you don't remind me enough, would it? Besides, I do. They're my favorites. I really wanted to share them with you. But if you've seen them, silly. I adore Christmas movies. I'd love to watch them with you, but we need to get Rudolph. It's there. Look, second from the bottom. I love you. You'd just better. I do. Anyway, one a night until Christmas. One a night, I agreed. Or maybe two, on some nights. David beamed. On some nights. I struggled to reassemble my many bags. Here, let me. David reached for two of my heavier bags. Good heavens. If these are for all your boyfriends, you must be seeing a whole football team. I batted my eyes. Why, sir, that's all in my past. Oh. We started walking again, darting around other shoppers and gazing into the shop windows as we passed. I caught David trying to sneak a peek into one of my bags. I would have slapped his hand, but I had the packages. So I turned my best glare on him, the one I'd learned from Mom. David chuckled, then turned his eyes back to the bags. So, all this is for me then? Ha, you'd like that. Of course I would. So who won the lottery then? Yeah, about that. See, well, that's something yeah, that's something I want to talk to you about. David stopped. That doesn't sound good. Suddenly, I found I couldn't meet his gaze, so I turned my attention to the bags and pretended to sort them again. All that about me loving Christmas? Yes. Well, what I really love is going home for Christmas. A little homesick, are we? Sometimes, a little, mostly at the holidays. We have all these traditions, see? Tree, midnight candlelight service, cocoa. See, they all mean a lot to me, David. Christmas is about going home, don't you think? That's pretty much what the word means to me. Christmas means home. Well, it sounds silly when you say it like that, but yeah, it does. I see. I took a deep breath. So all the packages and stuff, all this, well, most of it. See, it's for my family back home for Christmas. Sorry, I lost my place. For my family back home in Alabama, in the States. I know where Alabama is, said David. Well, more or less. Bottom right, isn't it? Yes? Right. Yeah, see, I always go home. For Christmas, I mean. It's like, it's a big deal for us. Ah, David smiled. A big deal then, I swallowed. We all gather. Mom, dad, my brother, grandparents, aunts, uncles, many cousins. My, that is a big deal. Tree, stockings, the works. Another deep breath. Okay, here goes. Just say it, Jesse. Go on, just say it. And well, see, I was hoping you'd come with me. Of course I'll come with you. I looked up at last. He was still smiling, and my heart melted. No, it exploded, melted and exploded, both of them at the same time, like the world's biggest snowball. It was rather a mess, really. You will? I will. I haven't even made my pitch yet. You had me at the many cousins bit. Ah, say that when you've met them. You're sure you won't mind? Really? David set his bags down on the pavement and reached down to touch my cheek. I always loved it when he did that. Jesse, I really want to meet your family. I really do. And I most especially don't want to be apart. Not at Christmas. Oh? David reached down and found a bag, a small one. Here, you can open another present. Yay! I would have clapped my hands, but, well, the bundles. I looked around for another place to set them down again. Here, no, just here, give. David managed to take my bags while giving me one in exchange. He knelt and set the bags on the sidewalk while I opened the bag. Inside, I found a single lovely Christmas ornament. It looked antique or handmade, maybe both. It was made of blown glass, but etched with delicate patterns, like a snowflake made of crystal. It was elegant, beautiful, and utterly unique. On it, someone had hand-painted words in elegant gold leaf script. First married Christmas. I gasped. David. Well, I suppose it's really for next year, isn't it? I looked down to find David on one knee, smiling, surrounded by all our bags and packages, holding an open ring box. My eyes were wide as my hands went up to cover my mouth. I could already feel the tears sliding down my cheeks. Damn it. That was not at all how I'd wanted to say yes, because I am such an ugly crier. That's the none of the flashbacks were in the original. So all of Jesse's backstory and her marriage and her loss are new to this version. And it really, I think, makes it a richer experience.
Good.
And a better companion for Raven, even though that was an accident. Want to talk more?
It is about time for questions and answers.
Yeah. Anybody have questions to ask?
How was Raven an accident?
I meant the fact that they're both about grief,
Oh,
about women finding grief. I think we all go through dark places in our life, and the thing we want to do most is cocoon ourselves and shut away the world, but we can't do that for long because we need to be in the world and the world needs us to be in it. So eventually something is going to call us back to be on the path we're meant to be on. And I think a word for that force that pulls us to the place we need to be is miracle. And that's what these first two stories and next year's as well to a degree are about.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. I really appreciate. Oh, hey, Nikki.
Hey, how was it writing a female character?
Honestly, I've written a lot. I tend to do either first person or limited omniscient from a character's point of view, and I've done women as much as men in writing. So that, yeah, rephrased.
Now we know why you married her.
That's wonderful, though.
Yeah, it's a joy. It's a joy to do it because the first book I wrote, which is now coming out, I think in 2024, is also the longest book I've ever written. Is all told in first person, but each chapter has a different narrator, so they all had to sound different. And the characters that I found the most interesting to write were the women. And the easiest to distinguish from other characters were the women. I don't know why that is.
They're good examples.
Yeah. I guess when you create, you want to explore the things you know the least. So there you go. No, I really don't know.
So why an American in London?
Partially because it's a ghost story, and London is full of ghost stories. And if you're going to write a story about a ghost at Christmas, it starts with Dickens. And Carol and I had our first date in London by going to London.
Nice.
Go big or go home, right? And
For New Year's.
Yeah.
2000.
that was the second trip.
Oh, that was, okay. Right. The first was
Our second date.
a research trip. The first one was a research trip.
So we,
Right.
I went to the Dickens house while Carol went elsewhere. And we both went to the Cheshire Cheese, which was Dickens' favorite pub. But I put a lot of nods to Dickens in here. Someone refers to Dickens at one point. It snows in here. It doesn't actually snow in London, but I'm convinced it did during Dickens' day because we've all seen Christmas Carol and it snows. So apparently there was some great geological shift in the past. There's even a Marley Lane.
Oh.
And one of my favorite first sentences ever in literature is Marley was dead to begin with from A Christmas Carol. And so I put a Marley Lane in here. And it also inspired the first sentence of this, bringing the ghost in early. So my first sentences usually tend to do with place to put you in a setting. So this one does. It starts with I was in London, but it also brings the ghost in early. So it brings the story in almost right away. And I think there's not a city on the planet that feels more haunted than London.
Never been there.
Recommend it.
Thank you.
What is your writing process?
Holy crap.
Got it
Chaotic.
on tape.
Very disciplined. I will say, right, as observing from the side, he's very disciplined about constantly writing.
Did you hear that, Lou? I'm sure my publisher is watching from afar. Actually, he's not, but he'll be watching the recording. Our friend Benji, who had his book signing here, is doing an online book club tonight. And we'll be doing the same one in January. I mentioned that, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
Sorry. Anyway, what's the point about Benji at some point?
Well, we were talking about London
Yeah, writing process. That's
writing
right.
process, right?
I'm a big believer in there's 8 points of a story you have to know before you should start writing. This is technical structure, and I have a long video on my website about story structure and how the stories work. And I've given this talk at Georgia State 3 or 4 times, and Broadleaf once, at a fantasy convention called Conjuration. And it's everything I know about story structure. I think you have to know your basic structure before you can start. And then you sort of discover the characters and fletch in between those points. So I think you have to know your, whenever I've heard somebody talking about writer's block, it's just about always been they don't know their story well enough. But once you're in the habit of writing regularly, and once you sort of get the voices of your characters, you find you sort of want to spend time with them and hear what they have to say. I know writers who are constantly surprised by how their story unfolds. And I'm not one of them, because I generally know the high beats of where it's going to go. But I have been surprised by things that characters, especially the way characters reacted to each other. There was one pair that wound up romantically involved that had never occurred to me when I was plotting out the story that there would be chemistry there, but there was, and I went with it, and it really added flavor.
Thank you.
So to answer the question, I know my story, I know the beats, and I'll let the characters take over and fill in.
That must be the hard part, getting the conversation. Any conversation going between, I know you can do it just sitting here, you know, but still.
Getting started
Writing it
is the
down.
hardest. I mean, great advice for writers. Number one, know your story. Number two, if you have in your heart the God-given ability to not write, please embrace that. You'll be much happier. If you don't, one thing that I shared with Marianne, Marianne and I met in chorus in high school. And I learned as much about writing in chorus as pretty much anywhere else. I mean, I was supposed to be learning other things at the time, but I think Ms. Pritchett was glad to know that I did at least learn something at that point. But listen to a lot of music, because that rhythm gives your writing more of a flow and poetry. You learn to sort of have a meter to your writing. The second is listen to people talk and remember all their different mannerisms, and you'll find yourself with this stew pot that you can pull from and get great voices. They don't sound like any one person, but if you really look and think about it, you can probably digest and find 3 or 4 people that blended together to make this voice for that character. The first book I wrote, I based a character on John Burnett back there. By the time I got through with it, I think John would have, except for the fact I named the character John would have otherwise had no idea, because the character diverted very, very far from John by the time the book was finished. But it's great to have a starting place like that.
Any other questions?
Speaking of the autograph.
Yeah,
Sure.
we brought pens.
We did.
Yeah.
All right.
One more. Hey, Charlie.
Is there something special about the in-laws in your writing? You know, you went to Carol's parents and you wrote half the book.
Well, the decoration.
Yeah, I'm going to go with that. There's also not a lot to do in Morristown, and they had a lot of talking and catching up to do, and I had free time, so that helped.
Yeah.
But decoration, that was most of it.
Well, the ornament.
Yeah.
The ornament we gave to them. Remember that?
No,
I don't
the
remember.
ornament wasn't in the first version of the story, though.
No, but it is related to them.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll tell one cute story then. It's tangential. We had gone to, we went to Canada, what's it?
Quebec City.
Quebec City. Brought back a beautiful little hand-blown ornament for my parents. Gave it to my mom. And then years later, we go up there, and by this time she's like full into dementia. And she gave it to me. She had sort of they weren't really doing so much holiday shopping or things like that, but this was very much kind of associated to the holidays for us at that point, and it became really bittersweet. She gave it back to me with a little note that said, "My best friend gave this to me, and I really want you to have it." And she had just like, yeah. So now I'm not touching that note. I think it just made that idea of a beautiful little ornament kind of very special.
For those of you who don't mind spoilers, that will probably be Christmas Story 2028 or something.
No.
Well, yeah.
Anybody else? Well, we'd be delighted to sign for y'all if y'all want.
Yep, if you guys need a book, then you can go over to the checkout and you can get both the Raven and the Red Christmas Pack.
Hey, Charlie, we'll come to you. Michelle.